All right. It's about 3 o'clock, so we are going to go ahead and get started. First of all, I just wanted to say welcome and thank you to everybody who has joined us today. This is a special program presented by the Southern Pines Public Library and the Pines Preservation Guild. My name is Laurel Holden, and I'm the librarian too for programs and outreach. I wanted to mention that if you would like to support programs like these, joining the Friends of the Library is a great way to do that. We have more information about that on our website, and I will put a link to that in our chat box. So today we have a special program from Leslie Bryans of the Pines Preservation Guild. The Pines Preservation Guild was founded in 2020 as a community organization, and they work to save heritage buildings and promote sensitive, sustainable community development. The Guild actively brings awareness to at-risk historic properties in the Sandhills region, shares potential preservation projects, has local experts teach preservation techniques and philosophy, highlights historic properties for sale, and inspires people to become involved in policymaking in the region. So I will put a link to their organization's website. And Leslie Bryans is our presenter today. She is a native of Virginia Beach, Virginia, and holds a BA in Historic Preservation from the University of Mary Washington and a Master of Architecture from Texas A&M University. She currently serves on the Town of Southern Pines Historic District Commission and was named a 2016 Fort Bragg Military Spouse of the Year. After 10 years living in various cities across the world as a military spouse, and working in the graphic design and branding field, Leslie has returned to her preservation roots and has the honor of calling Southern Pines home since 2015. She and her husband live downtown in a 1910 folk Victorian foursquare with their toddler, dog, and a small flock of chickens. So Leslie, I'm going to turn it over to you, and we would just ask if you have any questions, just hold them for the end and you can type them in the chat box, and Leslie will be happy to answer them for you.
Well, Laurel, thank you so much for having me today. We are really thrilled to be offering this class for the Southern Pines Public Library. And we think this really gets people to understand and learn more about the wonderful town that we live in. And what's been wonderful is, as Laurel mentioned, I've had the honor of living all over the world, but we've been here for the past 5 years and we absolutely love it. And so when Laurel came and said that she wanted to have the Pines Preservation Guild give a little background on what makes Town of Southern Pines so unique and wonderful through their architecture and historic buildings, we kind of jumped on it. So I'm here again. My name's Leslie Bryans, and we're just going to kind of hop right in. And again, if you have questions, just put them in the chat, and hopefully we can kind of get through. You're going to get a really broad overview today of all of the really unique, wonderful buildings that are in Southern Pines, and we've got a lot of them. I'm going to be going over about 40 buildings today. So that are various, you'll see, they're just going to span the entire history of Southern Pines, really. So the first one that we're going to go over is we're going to talk about historic district. So Southern Pines has a historic district. We are part of the Southern Pines National Historic District, which is the National Register of Historic Districts, National Register of Historic Places, which is an inventory of the nation's historic properties in their historic context. So you hear of houses that are individually listed. The historic district is the entire district with a bunch of houses that add to the historic context of the area that they're in. So it is similar to the individual listing, and in the fact that you get tax credits if you are in a National Historic District, but it doesn't put any restrictions on a homeowner. And what is also really interesting is if there's any federal money towards a project, knowing that there is a National Historic District that is affected or a National Historic Property that's on the registry, then it triggers a federal review. So that's what's really the benefit of being on the National Register. Southern Pines was listed on the National Register in 1991, but it has not been updated since to incorporate post-war buildings. And so 50 years is considered historic. So a building that is 50 years or older is considered historic building. It could be eligible for listing on the National Register. And so that would make it 1970 would be historic now, which blows a lot of people's minds, but 1970 is considered historic now at the national level. We do have a historic district here in Southern Pines. It is the district that the locality has deemed worth protecting. And it usually falls within the boundaries of a National Register historic district. And I have a map on the side that you can see that the green is the National Historic District, which you can see is very big. The local historic district is the red, and that spans 10 blocks downtown. That local district is smaller than the national, and they are often governed by a local body. Laurel mentioned that I'm on the Historic District Commission. I have the great honor of being on that. And what that body does is help. They've adopted guidelines. They use the Secretary of the Interior standards for the treatment of historic properties. It's usually Secretary of the Interior's standards for rehabilitation, which allows for the adaptive reuse, the sensitive renovation and rehabilitation is actually the correct term for heritage buildings. So it's not a restoration, but it is sensitive updating, essentially, is what rehabilitation is for modern uses. So that's what the guidelines that the Historic District Commission in Southern Pines use. And those are available online through the Southern Pines website. So anybody can find them and look through them and get a better idea on what exactly the guidelines are for that 10 block section of Southern Pines. And that regulatory body, which is the HDC, reviews certificates of appropriateness, COAs, for major work on existing properties, as well as new construction in this 10 block defined district. It can suggest the denying of a demolition permit or a major alteration to a historic property within that district, and then can leverage certain legal or monetary penalties. So it's just, that's really, that district is the district that has teeth, if you will. That there's restrictions and certain conditions for those homes, for those buildings that are within that 10 block radius. So that's a little background on the historic district. So in Southern Pines, these are the 40 properties we're going to be talking about today. And I've color coded them based upon what architectural style they are, but you can see the gray is the National Historic District, that gray outline, and then the red is the interior. And as you can see, there's only about 4 properties that actually are protected at the local level. Most of them lay outside of that local historic district, and then a good portion are within the National Historic District. But then we also have a portion that are usually the old, newer properties, as in post-war. World War II, that are outside of the National Historic District. And there was a survey, a status update that was done in 2010 about the expansion of or contraction of this National Historic District in order, again, for people to be able to get those tax credits to be able to do work on their properties and get that residential tax credit. But then also show that there is a broader swath of historic properties outside of what in 1991 they believed was, I believe it stopped in 1945 was where it ended. And so unfortunately, anything post 1945, and you'll see we've got a lot of them, and that are not in a historic district, or they're not considered contributing within the historic district. So, but you can see there is a lot of properties that sit outside of the government historic district overlay zone, which is that local historic district, that red portion. So, so first we're going to go way back. We're going to go back to the Tidewater South traditional. This property is the Shaw House, which I'm pretty positive everybody knows where it is. And the Moore County Historical Society owns this property, and it's Tidewater South tradition. And this is pre-1850. This is, a really functional property, as in, everything was based upon what were necessities at the time. So you've got this large porch that provides shelter and relief in the summer. It's commonly one story, less emphasis on enlarging the interior space, because in North Carolina and in the Tidewater region, you're not spending a ton of time inside, especially during the summer. You're outside, but you have that large porch to kind of keep you protected during thunderstorms and bad weather in the summer. But you're not spending, you don't need to have these huge spaces. Like if you looked at a house of this time period that was in the New England area. It has a hall and parlor orientation. So you literally can just walk in and there's the hall, which is a big room. And then there's a parlor, which is another room. And they're just purely functional spaces. And they are, this style was dominant until well into the 20th century. The Shaw House in particular, which was built in 1840, has federal style and Greek revival style details, mainly on the inside. But they, if they did do extensions on the property to expand that interior space, it usually were small shed extensions. There wasn't really, again, less emphasis on that interior space and making sure you've got that large interior space. And it was the use of locally available materials. So the Shaw House is a really good example of that. Shaw House is individually listed on the Historic Register, and it has its own kind of complex. So very cool. I'm sure most of you are have worked or familiar with the Moore County Historical Society Association. And so they're great to go look at, especially to see these really unique types of buildings in Southern Pines. So moving along, we've got folk Victorian. So this is what a lot of people see when they come to Southern Pines. They see a lot of these folk Victorian buildings. The period of significance for these was 1817 to 1910-ish. Victorian's kind of not a great term for it because Victorian era, everyone thinks turn of the century, but it was a lot earlier than that. As you can see, there's brackets under, or the characteristics. It's a folk home that they have put Victorian elements and design elements on. So we've got these decorative verge boards up here. A verge board is, what you see under the eaves. There's spindle work on porch detailing or a flat jigsaw cut trim. You can see here on the Armitage Richardson house, which is on 200 North Bennett, that's kind of, this has a very well preserved example of this folk Victorian, the spindle work, the verge boards. Details are a lot less elaborate than other Victorian styles. Again, it's a folk home that they literally have just put application on of decorative elements. And then it usually has simple windows and doors trim. And then it really does have, you can't really see it on this one, you'll see it in another one, but there's a lot of emphasis on symmetry, and the wall surfaces are really simple. You're not getting into a lot of super ornate things like we're going to be showing in a next subtype or next type. So again, Armington Richardson house is from 1886, right on Bennett Street. This is a gabled front, which you can see the gable is the portion under the roof. And then that kind of faces you. There's two windows. You can see that's a gable end. And as a side note, I'm going to just add this. Southern Pines, it's really hard to take really awesome photos of the front of buildings, their facades, straight on, because we've got a lot of trees and they're usually hiding a lot of the architecture from the street. That's intentional sometimes, but there's a reason we're called Southern Pines. We got a lot of pine trees, and so you'll see some of the details on these houses are kind of hidden. But I just encourage you that next time you go walk by or drive by any of these properties to kind of keep your eye out for these things. You might see them a little bit better than just on a picture where there's a large tree in the way. Anywho, so this has a gabled front wing. That gable, is right where you see the eaves under the roof. And then it also has a wing off to the side, which is off the back. So, and then these are two other examples. There's the Patch House on 130 West Main from 1900. This is a really early example of the resort cottages that were built during the founding of Southern Pines. This is a very, very modest structure, but it is folk Victorian. It's symmetrical and it has a spindlework frieze, which you can see very simple under the porch. And this was actually associated, this home, which is the yellow home on the left, was purchased by a founder of Southern Pines, C.T. Patch, in 1915, and he used this as an additional home. His home is actually around the corner from this. His home is there around the corner. So, and then the John N. Powell house, which is the blue house, that's on 150 North Bennett. That's from 1899. And this one is interesting because it's a pyramidal roof. You can see the pyramid structure of the roof. And it does have the brackets under the eaves, which are very, a lot of folk Victorians have those brackets to just kind of add another, almost not an inexpensive, but just an easy way to add decoration to a very simple home. This did have a wraparound porch that went all the way around at some point, but that's been enclosed. It's probably enclosed in the 30s. So you see that these just have really simple 1/1 windows. But again, it's got that spindle work and the decorative brackets and the turned posts. So this is really folk Victorian. You'll see a lot of these in Southern Pines. They're just a very simple, very classic home style. So, and it's very synonymous with early Southern Pines. And you can see they are either big or they're small. So lots of different sizes. Moving on to Queen Anne. Now this is kind of what folk Victorian wanted to become. It was around the same time period, 1880 to 1910, but this was, let's be as elaborate and ornate as possible. So the Queen Anne, they really wanted to avoid having smooth wall surfaces. So as you can see, they use numerous textures and patterns, whether it's shake versus shingle, or they have decorative eave work in this one in particular. And you'll see any way that they could possibly break up a smooth wall, that is what they tried to do in Queen Anne. It usually has a steep pitched roof with a dominant front facing gable. As you can see, this Canondark has the front facing gable with the steeply pitched roof. And then they have partial or full width asymmetrical porches, usually 1 story high. Canondark in specifically was from 1909, and that one has very unique spindlework details, as you can see. And then it features a Queen Anne stained window. So right under the words Canondark, that's a Queen Anne stained window, those are actually pretty rare in Southern Pines. It's a large pane of glass, and you can kind of see it, that's surrounded by smaller panes of glass bounded by that are colored. So you get that mix of colored glass, stained glass. Sometimes they're not always stained, but that's usually very character defining, is that large piece of glass surrounded by the smaller pieces of glass. And then, you've got the really elaborate gable ornament. So this was a common architectural style for resort areas pretty much all over the United States. People were going on vacation and they really wanted to show off their money. And it was easy for them to get these pre-cut architectural details because of the railroad. So Laurel and I were talking about this prior to starting, but a lot of these building styles directly reflect our dependence on a certain type of transportation style. So pre-railroads, you just got what you could get locally. But as you move on from folk Victorian, Queen Anne, we move on, it is, what can you get from a railroad, and how does the growth reflect in due to the railroad in Southern Pines. So this is the first house, I believe, that we've talked about that is southeast of the railroad tracks in Southern Pines. So we're kind of moving south. And so you'll kind of see that little bit of movement. Everything before this was north of the railroad tracks. And so we also have the Gregory Milliken House, which is on East New Hampshire. And that has, this house is very hard to miss in Southern Pines. It just kind of screams Queen Anne. Everybody thinks of Queen Anne. they think of this house in Southern Pines. So it's a typical, it's got shingled gabled ends and a sawn work gable ornament. So, you know, the gables are a little hard to see on here, but there's a lot of elaboration in that. So take a peek next time. You can see it a little bit behind the tree. There's some really unique gable and shingle work there. And then it's also got the turn posts on the porch. It's got the brackets with the spindle frieze on that. And then it also uses bays to help break up an expanse of wall. So you're not getting just a flat wall, you're getting, you know, some form of architectural element that's jumping out at you or disrupting your vision to make it more ornate. And then you can see there's also a bracketed main cornice. So that's pulling in something that we talked about with folk Victorians. And then just as a side note, Milliken was a doctor in Southern Pines, and his office at the time is now the Southern Pines Administration Office. So that little brick building, that's where Milliken worked. That was his building. The Kurtz house, which is the bright yellow one here on the side with, of course, the tower. That's a thing. I think a lot of people, when they think of Queen Anne's, they think of towers and they think of these turrets, and that is an element, but it's not the only element. So this is on North Ash Street, the Kurtz house, Kurtz Wheeler house, because it was called the Wheeler when an owner turned it into a boarding house. But it's a cross gable style. So there's a gable that runs parallel to what we're looking at. And then there's a gable that runs perpendicular to what we're looking at. So they, again, cross gable. And then of course there's the use of the tower. There's a lunette in the tower. And then it also has these slender chamfered columns with the brackets. So they're not turn posts, but they're chamfered, which means they don't have square edges. They kind of have had that edge trimmed off. So it's got almost a little bit of a detail on that column. And then the cutout scroll saw banister, you can see that's using a scroll saw, which was becoming much more popular and available to people to make these, as opposed to using turned posts. They could just use a scroll saw and make these really easy flat banisters and architectural details. So that again is just a really neat use of. We don't have a ton of Queen Anne's in Southern Pines, but we do have, the ones that we have are they do tell a very interesting story. So this is all for Queen Anne at the moment, but we're going to move on to what I think Southern Pines is most known for, and I think most people can agree with that, which is Colonial Revival. So Colonial Revival, and unfortunately for some reason the little call outs have not come out. They were much thicker when I was making this, but very thin lines, so I apologize for that. But Colonial Revival it became popular in 1880. It was popular till 1955, and honestly it's still to this day, it can be considered popular. It's harkening back to the rebirth of an interest in the early English and Dutch homes of the colonial period in America. And so that's kind of what pulled the interest of, pulled a renewed interest in the colonial era. And so this is how they were reflected. They don't often, they're not exact replicas of what we see in colonial period, like true colonial. But the name that is the most well connected to Colonial Revival here in Southern Pines is Amer Embury II. And you'll see some of his stuff. He did a lot. But this, just some characteristics are of this building type is they usually accentuate the front door with a decorative crown supported by columns or pilasters. And then there was almost always double hanging windows with multi-pane glazing, usually grouped. So you didn't really see them too often on their own. They usually were doubles or triples, as you can see in this photo. This was a dominant style of domestic buildings for the first half of the 20th century in Moore County and in the country. So the masonry was also usually used as a high style variation of this. So most of the times you're going to see wood, but on occasion you'll see there's some examples of brick. So this example right here is on Country Club. It's actually a Sears kit, which Sears kit, if you haven't heard of that term before, were pre-made homes. You usually would get a catalog in the mail of homes, Montgomery Ward, Sears. There were a couple other companies, but they would literally show you, you said, oh, hey, I like, you know, in this instance, it's the Crescent, or, you know, I like this other design. And you would order that, and then the house would come up on by train, and you would pick your house up, and it would be brought up over to your lot, and it would be built. And, you know, there were builders who were Sears kit builders, and they would put your building together. And it was incredibly economical. It was a way for people to get these homes that were on trend and in style at the time, but for very affordable prices. And they are incredible. Everything came numbered. There's a Colonial Revival around the corner from me here in Southern Pines that the owners had showed me in the basement. They still have all the numbering from when the house was put together, which is still just really neat. And it's a very cool way to show how the railroad influenced buildings in this country. So next, you can see here, there's two other, oh, sorry, I'm gonna go back real quick. On this particular one, apologies. They have a symmetrical large gabled portico on this, which is really unique because it's got a curved underside of the porch, which is not very common. It also has Tuscan columns, triple windows, and then has an interesting craftsman front door, which is not normally associated with this time period. So that was there in 1991. It's still there now. I'm not quite sure if that, I'm pretty positive that was added later after the house was built. But these are two other ones. Now, the one on 335 East Connecticut, which is the white one here, the left, that is attributed to Amar Embry as well. But it is a gambrel roof style. It's really hard to see. And again, it's those trees. It's very hard to get good photos of some buildings here. Anytime I was trying to get a picture of a gambrel Colonial Revival here, it's the trees would get in the way. So this is as good as I can get it. But next time you're driving down the street and you see a building, like if you see this, especially 335 East Connecticut, this has the unique gambrel roof style known as Dutch Colonial. And this is usually a shed dormer, which is, you know, a dormer, but it kind of goes across, it's a pop-up almost. That's kind of the other term people use, as a pop-up dormer across the rear and the front. And that just creates that extra head space in that, that second story. And then this is unique as it has a gable hood entrance. So there's no columns, nothing's holding up the portico. It's just hooded and it's supported by brackets. And again, this home is attributed to Amar Embry. He was the architect that the Boyds brought in to help design the town of Southern Pines, to be honest, to do the whole thing. He was brought in to help do Weymouth Heights, and a lot of the architectural, a lot of the buildings that were actually on the main drag on Broad Street. So that East Connecticut's from 1920, and then we hop over to Highland Pines Cottage. Now, this is Colonial Revival, and it's one of a series of cottages that Amar Embry designed for the Highland Pines Inn, which is in Weymouth Heights. And so this was unique because it is actually a spec cottage, and it's got a unique like U shape. It's a crescent style where you can see the entrance from the street is kind of recessed back and the two wings come forward a little bit at I believe it's 45-degree angles, but they have an enclosed gable portico and there's the use of lunettes. So this again has the coupled windows on the left side, double hung windows, but then just the hierarchy. And this one's interesting because it's only one story, similar to the first one that we looked at, the Sears kit, but this is a much larger house and a much grander home, but it's still only one level. So these are kind of the residential variations of Colonial Revival in Southern Pines. Now, other buildings that we think of when we think of Amar Embry are these two buildings. The Mudgett Medical Office building, which is from 1924, which is that higher style variation using masonry. So this one is, and this is right next to Broad Street Bakery, you know, when you're walking down Broad Street. This one has a box cornice with reeded friezes, and box cornices were very typical of this type. There's no exposed eaves. It's just very enclosed and finished off. This one also has blind arches and keystones with spring blocks. So keystones are that, and you can see it a little bit better on the former public library building. The keystone is what is at the top of the arch, and then the spring blocks are on the side of the arch, and that's structural. They feature two recessed entry types on the Mudgett Medical Office building. You've got one with this pedimented Colonial Revival surround with the fine lights, and this is the entrance. And then the one on the right side is kind of just has a simple stone lintel. And so this is the differentiation of primary entrance versus secondary entrance. The Mudgett building was a medical office on the first floor, and then an apartment building on the second floor. And so you can tell this is where the people, where if you're getting medical care, you go through the big portico entrance. If you're needing to go just to your apartment, you go through the smaller lintel, the one with the small stone lintel. You can also see there's a really interesting corbelled brick belt course between the stories, so it signifies, primary and secondary stories, but it's only on the street facade. A lot of these buildings were meant for people walking on the street side. Again, 24 people are driving, but they're not driving as much. It's still pedestrian driven, these designs. And then this former Southern Pines Public Library. This is an interesting building because it was actually built using Works Progress Administration funds. 39, we're in the middle of the Depression. So that's why Amer Embry built this. He built both of these buildings, but one was using Public Works funds and the other one was not. So it's just a very interesting juxtaposition and kind of continuation of the story. This one's got a Tuscan column portico, which you can see right there with this really big tympanum with a lunette in it. And then there's the really character defining feature on this building are the windows, which are these Gothic, interestingly, these Gothic double hung sash windows that have these panels below them. And this also includes the keystone and the spring block. But those windows, they're double hung. As long as they've been maintained, those things should be still working, which is pretty phenomenal. So, and again, another Amer Embry building. So he didn't only do Colonial Revival, but this was kind of his, this is what he was hired to do a lot of. And so we can kind of attribute a lot of our Colonial Revival buildings and a lot of the government buildings in Southern Pines were Colonial Revival because they harken back to Amer Embry and his work, whether or not he actually was the one designing them or not. So, and then we move on to the very, very closely related Classical Revival. I mean, there's a fine line between Colonial Revival and Classical Revival. So, there are certain elements that it can get a little confusing. So don't feel concerned if it's confusing to you. Most of the time, Classical Revival, you think of these big ornate mansions that have the gigantic columns, and that's not really what we've got here in Southern Pines. They're more grand than Colonial Revival, but they almost always, I mean, it's very rare to find a Classical Revival that does not have classical columns. In Colonial Revival, you don't have to have columns. That's not a thing. I mean, it's part of it, but not the whole story. Classical Revival, you got to have those columns of some form of a classical order. So they've got the symmetrical balanced windows and doors, still that emphasis on symmetry. And then the porch roof or the entry is usually supported by classical columns. This is the Gold Twin Cottage, 1913. Gold was a really big developer in this area, a developer as in he kind of saw that this was becoming a booming resort area. So he decided to build a bunch of cottages to house those people. So you'll see throughout here that there's a lot of gold stuff here. Just because he saw a need and built it. These are two buildings that are, this is one building that's technically divided up into two duplexes. Multifamily housing is actually the core of Southern Pines' story. Most of these buildings that we see downtown that are these they're duplexes, multiplexes. That's how they were when they were built. So Southern Pines is, because a lot of these families that were coming to Southern Pines, a lot of them couldn't afford to build their own resort, cottage. Most of them were like, I just want to come down here, but I want to have a place to stay, but I can't build my own. So they came and had multifamily. They stayed in one of these multifamily houses. And so to this day, some of them are still that way, which is really interesting. The boarding house we saw that was that was Queen Anne, this classical revival. There's another one we'll see coming up. So a lot of multifamily housing in Southern Pines. It's part of our story. So this is another Gould building, the Gould apartment building, 1913. And this has, again, the paired Tuscan columns on the porch. With this one's interesting because it has a Palladian window. Palladian window, it's a rectangular Palladian window, but it is a style of window where you have a main large window in the middle, as you can see in the Gould apartment building. There's on the top in the gable end, there's a larger window with two smaller windows on either side, and that's a type of Palladian window. It's the style, and that is pretty stylistic of the classical revival style. And then this also has lunettes in the side gables, which you can't see, unfortunately. So, but next time you walk through and see this building, you'll be able to kind of look a little bit more and see that on the side gables, which are unfortunately cropped out of this, they have little lunettes in them as well. And this was built in 1913, same as the Gould twin apartment that we just went over. That was just what was happening in 1930. They were building a lot of housing for people coming to the resort. And then we go over to North Broad Street, which is the Citizens Bank and Trust building, which again, we all know because we all walk past it. This one's from 1925. And this one, you can see it's got the limestone half columns that support a limestone entablature, which is that horizontal limestone portion that so it's that it's giving the image of that these columns are holding up this, again, very classical, harkens back to Greek, Roman architecture. That's kind of what we're all getting at here, is what they're trying to pull back to. This one's interesting because it does have metal sash industrial windows, which are still exist, and then it's got these arched passageways. So that kind of pulls in, the classical element, but what's neat is these hallways, these passageways, to kind of add another architectural support element to them. And then if you look over to the wings on the side, you can see that there is a limestone belt course between them. And that again is showing that hierarchy of, this is a commercial property. And so it is geared towards the pedestrian and being able to separate the pedestrian experience with the what's above that. So kind of the hierarchy of your style, your building hierarchy. And then this building, the Citizens Bank and Trust building, was also built by Amer Embry. So again, and he's using that higher style brick because this is a very public property building. So from classical revival, we stick within the revivals, but we move on to Gothic revival. And what's interesting is, to be honest, this building was largely out of style for homes by 1860. So it was not being used for homes by the time that Southern Pines was even being founded, but it was still being used for churches. And so most of the churches, you'll see a lot of the older ones do still use a lot of this Gothic revival vocabulary in their style. So you've got Emmanuel Episcopal, which is right here. It's right on East Massachusetts. It shows these lancet windows, which are kind of synonymous when you think of Gothic revival. Everyone thinks of these lancet Gothic windows. They're actually called lancet windows. So there's also the steeply pitched roof, and then they usually featured buttresses. So they're a little hidden on the side here, but we'll see them in some other examples. But a buttress is, it's a vertical element that's supposed to harken back to these quote unquote original Gothic churches that the buttresses were actually used for structural reasons. And a lot of times these are used for less structural, more just aesthetics. So the other one that it kind of is also Gothic is the Trinity AME Zion Church on West Pennsylvania. And this one's uses the brick towers, when towers are part of the Gothic style. There wasn't a tower with the Emmanuel Episcopal Church, but they not only have one, they've got two for the AME Zion Church. So they're slightly uneven, but you can see that there is the presence of those lancet windows, both stained glass and the vents, the louvered opening on that north tower. And so just that use is Gothic Revival, just the presence of those windows and the presence of that louvered opening in that lancet shape. And then you do see along the sides, there are the buttresses that run along the sides with a high water table. And a water table is kind of that elevation, that horizontal line that kind of delineates the first story from like what we would consider like the basement or, a lower story. That's what a water table is. So, and that apparently that encircles the entire building, that water table, which is very interesting. So, the next example is the Community Congregational Church on North Bennett Street, which used to be called the Church of Wide Fellowship. That's from 1927. Again, they use those pointed arch transoms and windows. These are a little bit more elaborate because they actually have structural elements in the windows. They're not just a simple lancet, but they've got structure inside of them. They have the buttresses and then the tower also, and again, trees, but the tower also uses those lancet windows as well, the lancet openings. But they also have there's a large rose window on one of the sides, and a rose window is just a big circular window that has stained glass usually in it. That's called a rose window. So these are the examples of the Gothic architecture. We don't have a lot of it, but the ones that we do have are churches. So that's the third revival that we're going through. The next revival, they were all about revivals at the early 20th century, but the next one's Tudor Revival. So this is based on English building traditions. Now, Gothic technically is based upon an English building tradition, and so is Colonial, but this one's just really hearkening to the English building tradition, whether it's Tudor, English cottage. You'll kind of see that it was only surpassed by Colonial Revival in the early 20th century in popularity in the country, but it really wasn't that popular in Southern Pines, which you'll kind of look at it and say, oh, well, there's like a bunch of buildings that you're going over. To be honest, we're going over them because they're big and they've lasted a long time, but a lot of the smaller buildings, they just kind of stayed away from Tudor Revival. This was popular until from 1890 to 1940. There's decorative half timbering on about a third of the examples, which is that half exposed wood with a little bit of the stucco in between. That's half timbering. The facade's usually dominated by prominent gables that are steeply pitched. And then there's usually tall, narrow windows, commonly in multiple groups with multi-pane glazing. So we'll see like diamond glazing or just multi-pane casements with small leaded windows. This is rosewood, which is from 1927, and it's got end-laid brick with stucco mainly on the main facade, except for there's brick on the gable ends. And then this is in there because this is a Louis Lachine designed building. So he was another prominent architect who designed these buildings in usually the Weymouth Heights area of Southern Pines, which was what the Boyds were working on they were working on the development of Weymouth Heights in the 20s. So the one that you see on the left, the small one, that is a later example of a Tudor. That's actually a Sears house. 570 East Indiana is the Ridgeland that was offered by Sears as a kit house, and it is in remarkably good condition. Like it is. There hasn't been a lot of additions on it. It has been very well. It's a very good representation of what would have been built at that time period. It has that steeply pitched uneven front gable. It's uneven as in one side of the eave is a lot longer than the other. And that one actually has a curve on it. And then it's got this really cool front chimney with uneven shoulders on it. These are shoulders, and the chimney has that, which is just a really kind of a neat architectural element. And so this was a very small, very economical option for the for members of, or for people who wanted to have a smaller but very architecturally pleasing building. The next one is the John Boyd House, Mrs. John Boyd House. This is from 1927, and this one is stucco, brick, and clay. As you can see, this has got a lot of different architectural elements to it. It's got window dormers, it's got gables, it's got eave styles, and they're all different sizes and they're all different styles. And that's kind of is typical of Tudor. You've got a lot of these different like architectural elements that somehow all work together, but they're all very different. And then they've got steep gables. They've also got casement windows mixed with double hung. And so it's just a lot going on, but it all works. This was designed by Alfred Yeoman. So the three big designers at the time were Yeomans, who was actually an landscape architect or a landscape designer, excuse me, who started designing buildings. So both him, Amer Embry, and Louis Lachine were like the three big architects for the Weymouth Heights-ish area, which were these bigger homes. So this one, just really, it packs a lot, but it works all together, and it's very typical Tudor. The next is Loblolly, which is on North Valley, and this one has a lot that's hidden from the view. You can't see a lot of the architectural detail from the street. You do have this really steep eave with the casement windows, which is really wonderful. They're a great architectural detail, but there's also checkerboard brickwork on the chimneys and the gables, which unfortunately you can't see. But if you're driving by, you can see that there's some really decorative brick being used on this property, which is really neat. And this is actually stucco clay tile. This isn't brick with stucco over it. It's not frame with stucco on it. It is clay tile the way that it was designed. So they got to play with some kind of neat architectural building techniques when they were building these properties. And then the Duncraig Manor was built in 1930. And this is an English cottage style, which is supposed to kind of be a little bit smaller style of Tudor, with a lot of emphasis on the half timbering. And this is mock half timbering. There is such thing as real half timbering, but we don't really do that in the United States. That's pretty much England. But this has got the leaded glass multi-pane windows, and then it's painted brick as opposed to stucco. So, which is kind of a neat little. This not only has the square casement windows, but it's got the diamond on the first floor, as you can see down here. And then that is, and this one was also built by, Alfred Yeomans, the Duncraig Manor, and it was actually built for a Quaker Oats heiress. So we had some famous people in Southern Pines at various times. Next is the Spanish Revival. So we're still sticking with revivals. We're still in that world, 1950 to 1940. And, this is a pretty, this is a pretty interesting variation on this one on East Massachusetts. It has the low pitched roof, which is pretty typical. It's got tile roof covering, which is typical of this architectural type. This one has eaves with little to no overhang, except for the fact that the porch is a full length porch. And so, it includes that porch, but it doesn't really have that overhang beyond the porch. And it usually uses a stucco wall surface. So we'll see some other ones, but this one's right on East Massachusetts. It's kind of like a smaller one-story version of that, of this style. And we've got 265 Northridge, which is from 1940. So it's a later Tudor revival. And this one's got actually a metal tile roof, not a clay tile. It's stucco like the other ones. And then it's got these lunette vents on it. And which is, we've seen that architectural detail being used. But what's also unique is it's got a mix of window types. It's got these double hungs, but then it also has casement windows in other portions of the property. So again, this is a later iteration of kind of on the very tail end of Spanish Revival. And then Briarwood, which is from 1906, which is on the right side here. This one is a very interesting because it's also kind of mission inspired. There's some elements of that, but this is rough cast stucco, so it doesn't have a smooth surface. It's a very rough surface on it. It's got deep eaves, and there's the diamond lattice casement windows, which are they go every which way. You've got ones that are, the diamonds are elongated going horizontally, or they're elongated going vertically. It's very interesting. This is a really unique home that's got a lot of interesting detail to it, even though it doesn't look like it from the street. Once you kind of get a little closer, there's a lot of really unique details to the exterior. And then it's Spanish tile. And this house is on Orchard. And what's interesting is this home actually was never on Orchard. Like if you look at the National Register nomination, that's not this house's address. It's changed its addresses since, because it was on this massive piece of property. And so now it's got a different address than what it would have in the National Register, the National District nomination. So it's kind of a fun little side note. But that's Spanish Mission Revival. Again, we don't have a ton of those either, but it's just neat the ones that we do have, how different they are. What we do have a lot of are craftsmen. We have a lot of craftsman homes because they were economical, they were small, but they were very on trend from 1905 to 1950. People could just get these homes. They were not terribly expensive, and they could see them in a lot of architectural magazines of the time. And so unlike the catalogs, which you could still just like point and say, I want this one, and then it would get delivered, some of these are were not many of them, but some of them in town were kit homes, but most of them were just, hey, it was in a magazine that somebody had this somewhere, especially out in California, and then they decided to bring, that they really wanted somebody who's reading it saying, hey, I really want this building. I want this building style. And so they would take it to the builder, and that's what they would build, something along those lines. So it's interesting because you can see the influence of media and, the early iterations of HGTV, how that influenced some of our buildings here in Southern Pines. So this was the dominant style in the United States for small houses from 1900 to 1920, but by 1910, it was very well represented in Southern Pines. It's influenced by the English arts and craft movement. Pattern books offered the style to the masses, magazines did, and so it became the go-to style for homes in the US. This is the Buck and Bush house on South Ash from 1905. And this one has a shed dormer, which is the little dormer at the top, the pop dormer. With what's also interesting is it's side gabled, which, we'll see different variations on that, but it's got a full width porch with this really broad elliptical arch, which is really cool. It has the typical exposed roof drafters, which we'll see from the other examples. It's got a low pitched gable roof with that eave overhang. And then they're commonly 1 or 1.5 stories high. Remember, these are not these super elaborate cottages or quote unquote cottages that you see that these millionaires had in Weymouth Heights. These are closer to downtown, and they are a little bit more, they're just smaller homes in general. The next ones that we have are the Gould Cottage. So Gould, who we saw was into building rental homes at the turn of the century, or in the first portion of the 20th century. This one's also from 1930. This is Gould Cottage, and on May Street. And this one's interesting because it has a hipped roof style as opposed to the gable. And it has a recessed entrance porch, just like the other one, a recessed entrance porch, just like the Buck and Bush house. But this one's got an uninterrupted basket handle, basket arch handle. And what's neat is you can kind of see it over on the left-hand side is it has a really interesting diamond over one It's a diamond pane with over one single pane window on the left. So it's got some flared siding, which is typical, can be found on a lot of craftsman homes in Southern Pines. Down at the bottom near the foundation, it's got a flare, which is just pulls from that California craftsman style that was becoming popular out there and was now moving east. And then on the right-hand side, you see the Southern Pines Building Company. They actually, in direct response to Gould and all of his buildings, the Southern Pines Building Company was founded, and they created a series of rental cottages. And this was a rental cottage that they created that is on Ash Street from 1911. And this has a hipped roof style as well, but as opposed to having a shed dormer, this has a hipped attic dormer, which is, you can see right at the top. We're talking about the blue house on the right side. And then this one's got a bowed front, which is really neat. This actually bows out this little area with the 3 windows. It's a bowed window, which is a neat architectural detail. But this includes the diamond lattice and the 1/1 casement windows that are throughout the house. So again, smaller, just not terribly, they're not screaming for attention, but they were modest, but they really have their own character. And again, this is showing the growth of Southern Pines as a resort community. These were to house people who are moving to the area temporarily for the season. So this is actually the end of the period of significance for the National Register nomination. They pretty much ended it in the 40s. We pretty much covered everything. But that was done in 1991. So there's 30 years of heritage buildings that actually aren't included in that, but are really unique to this area. So we've got really cool art moderne. Art moderne, it's part of the modern movement, which is Art Nouveau, Art Moderne, Art Deco, kind of part of that time frame. Pretty much Art Deco, Art Moderne. And this is 1920 to 1940, not a huge expanse of popularity, but very neat that not only do we have one in Southern Pines, but it's a pretty good example of art moderne. And this is the Mayfair building, which is on May Street from 1950. And it's got a flat roof, usually with a ledge. And then it's got a smooth stucco wall surface that's uninterrupted. It's interrupted, but it's usually only interrupted with your steel casements, which were pretty common for this style. And then it's got curved corners. So some of these, it's got the curved corner on the roof, but then also on portions of the building itself. So this is the one type of art moderne we do have in Southern Pines, and it's a pretty good example, but it is not within, it's not contributing to the National Historic District. But again, that probably should be updated. So this is the one example that we've got. And then we move on to what we had a lot of, and we don't have a ton of them now, unfortunately, and that's minimal traditional. This is what is known as the little house that could. This is a style of home that was built, that it could be built during the Depression because FHA insured loans would support them. It could also be built quickly. So a lot of these homes, especially post-war, it's all about could they be insured? And you'll see that that's kind of a thing that kind of goes through for the next few styles. It could be built quickly to accommodate the post-war surge of military families coming to this area, as well as World War II production plant workers that were moving on to new industries post-war. It solved a ton of problems facing the Depression and post-war housing shortages. So this house solved a lot of problems, this type of home. They were replaced by ranch homes in 1950, like that's what became popular, but Southern Pines had a good portion of minimal traditional homes, but unfortunately they're getting lost left and right now. We're losing a lot of them to demolition because they're small. They're not huge homes. They're perfect starter homes, but they're just not, they don't have a lot of architectural flair to them. They don't have dormers. That's usually rare. The roof eaves are usually with not a lot of overhang. Low to intermediate pitched roof, generally gabled, double hung multi-pane windows, as you can see. right here, and then generally small and one story, and then they're again becoming increasingly rare in Southern Pines. So a lot of these post-war houses are pretty endangered right now, unfortunately. So the next one is the ranch. Pretty much everyone knows what a ranch is. I think if you say, oh, I'm moving into a ranch, people kind of get the idea of what you're talking about. This is the home that showed our dependence on the automobile. It is, I mean, these homes are directly due to our reliance on automobiles. The suburbs, they were mainly pushed a little farther out. The suburbs meant that you could have more land. So these homes could be stretched out. They didn't have to go up high. They could take up a large amount of space on a lot because you could have a large lot. And oddly enough, they are based loosely on Spanish colonial precedents, just with the low roof, small amounts of overhang, and the one story layout. But they had their roof overhangs were pretty moderate. I know I said commonly wide, but they're pretty moderate sized. Didn't really have dormers. They normally have a large picture window present. They were built broad and low to the ground with asymmetrical facades. And so this on Valley Road is, this is from 1959. You know, this is a very good example of a ranch home. In addition to this other one on South Valley, which it's interesting because this uses a breeze block, which you can see here on the side. This is it's a concrete precast structural element that is used to hide the carport from the street. And these are called breeze blocks because they allowed the breeze through, but you couldn't see anybody. That's what that decorative element is on the right-hand side. This has a classic element that you can walk through. It has a slightly recessed front door, but that large picture window that you can see. And then on the West Delaware image on the bottom from 1960, this one, again, large picture window, no dormers, low to the ground. They would not normally have shutters, so that's not a normal element of ranch homes, but the emphasis is on the horizontal. That is the whole emphasis with this. And so, you know, you really never see divided lights in the windows. They're usually wood or aluminum with a horizontal element, not vertical element of division. No real vertical mullions or anything like that. Usually if you see a vertical mullion in a ranch home, it's because it's a replacement element. So that's just been added later. So these are the ranch homes that are typical in our area. The next is contemporary, which I know goes on to 1990, but these are definitely 1940 to 1970, very heavy. A more emphasis on, these were heavily influenced by Frank Lloyd Wright's Usonian homes. So Frank Lloyd Wright, everyone knows who he is, but he created this Usonian home that was really easy it was essentially designed for the quote unquote common man, and that was his design. So these designs were due to 3 building innovations that happened in the 30s that made these buildings possible and this style possible, which was thick plate glass, and then exterior grade plywood, where you could actually use plywood as your exterior application, as opposed to, you know, in Southern Pines, it would be, you know, pine. You're using plywood, and then also new glue, and that allowed for engineered wood to be more incorporated. So you're getting into this more, your home is less from natural materials that essentially have come out and have not been processed, quote unquote, as much. These homes are made from what can we get that has been engineered or what has been industrially created. This design also rejects the idea that all these earlier styles are defined by their exterior details. The contemporary home was like, forget that. We care about what's on the inside, and the outside is going to look like what it looks like. So they really incorporated the outdoors with these. There's a lot of like indoor outdoor spaces. And then they would often hide the entry facades. They had low pitched flat gabled roof because they didn't want it to stand out from the nature that was around the property. A lot of exposed roof beams, a lot of exposed structure. The idea of having windows in the gable ends, and then the entry door is recessed or obscure, because honestly, they didn't care about this idea of having a big hallway through a house. They thought that was a waste of space. So putting a door, they just kind of would put the door where it needed to go, but they didn't have the design based around a central hallway or anything like that. This was actually a favorite design style of architects from 1945 to 1965, but it fell out of favor because primarily the FHA did not like to insure these types of buildings. They liked the ranch style homes. They did not like to insure contemporary style homes. And so as a result, these started out falling out of favor because people couldn't get loans for them. So that's why. So this one's on 238 West Vermont, and it actually is a very early example of contemporary. It's got a lot of emphasis on either the horizontal and pretty much on the horizontal. This window is not original to the building. That would have just been either it wouldn't have been there, or B, it would have been just one single pane. But other than that, it's pretty original. The 390 East Indiana Avenue, this one kind of toes the line between ranch and contemporary. But you can see again a lot of emphasis on the horizontal, but those low, not a lot of windows. There is that big picture window, but again, that's why it kind of dances between a ranch and a contemporary. And then on 310 East Indiana, this is a contemporary where not a lot of windows, a lot of horizontal emphasis. It does have a prominent front door, which is kind of unusual for a contemporary, but everything's just horizontal, and that's very synonymous with contemporary style. Then we've got North May Street. This one's unique in the fact that it has a chimney that faces the front of the house. So you do have that interruption in the wall surface. But other than that, again, not a lot of emphasis on the on windows, even though you do see two sets of windows. They're not taking up a huge portion of it. A lot of it is what's going on the inside. Not a lot is told on the outside about what's going on the inside. And then the Calvin Howell House, which is here on the right-hand side, this one again dances between contemporary and what we're getting to next, which is international. And this is actually was built by mid-century architect Calvin Howell, who he ran a very prominent architecture firm here in Southern Pines with Thomas Hayes, and we'll actually look at his architecture next. But he was a president. Again toes the line between international and contemporary, but this is very typical of mid-century design, architecture design. Architects again loved contemporary, they loved international, which we'll get to next, and this is kind of a good mix of those two. Again, you don't know what's going on really on the interior of the home. You can't tell from the exterior what these room uses are, because the windows that are there are very they don't tell a lot. You can't see a lot through them. They're small, they're thin. You don't need to have a light to get in sometimes, especially from the front, because you got so much electricity and whatnot going on. Usually there's more expanse of glass on the back side, the private side of a building. But on the front public side, does not tell the viewer a lot of the story of what's going on inside. And then the last style that we're talking about today is international style. And this is 1925 to present. It was not a super popular style, but it was used by Tommy Hayes for his house here in Southern Pines, which is on East Massachusetts. And this features a flat roof without a ledge. Windows are flush with the outer wall, large window groupings. This is facing the backyard. So this would not be what you would see from the front of the house, and it isn't what you see from the front of the house, but this is what you see on the back side of the house. This large expanse of it's not very decorated. It's just kind of like a box. And that's done on purpose. There's a lot of exposed structure in international, and there's a lot of cantilevering that's featured. And then you can also see smooth, unadorned wall surface. There's, again, not a lot of decoration on this, but it shows a lot of the structure. It's a lot more emphasis on how is this building engineered, as opposed to, you know, this, yeah, it's the form over the function over form almost, you know, showing how the building is built is highlighted. And so this is international style, and it's, you know, one of, again, Tommy Hayes, who was, he was a very prominent North Carolina mid-century architect, and this is was his residence. And so both him and Howell designed a number of prominent mid-century buildings in the Southern Pines, Pinehurst, Moore County area. So, and that brings us to present. Those are all of the styles that I went over that really lead us up to the 1970, that 50-year cutoff. So all those buildings, you know, especially post 1940, are very important in telling the story of Southern Pines and its post-war time period, but they're not well documented. So I hope this at least gives some people some understanding of these buildings beyond them just being, oh, that's a ranch. Okay, well, how is it a ranch? Or, oh, that's just a small old 1940s building. Well, actually, it's minimal traditional, and there's all these really cool aspects about it. And so there's a couple other buildings that we could have gone over. Unfortunately, you know, we did have a Lustron here in Southern Pines up until this past year, which is a really amazing, unique post-war building, prefab building style, but unfortunately that's gone now. So, you know, we've got a couple really neat buildings that, you know, are not considered, that are historic, but they might not be thought of as historic by people, but they are. So these are the resources I used in my research, and what I use pretty much every day. The Anne Alexander book is really great. It's from 1981. It's not in publication. There are some errors in it, but it's neat to kind of get an idea of what was here at one point. The National Register nomination, Mary Ruffin Hanbury up in Raleigh did the district survey update in 2010 to kind of give us an idea of what needed to be done. But, you know, that's just kind of, it kind of went to Raleigh. So, and then the number one book, and you know, I might want to stop my my screen share, but the number one book that I recommend, and after, I'll get to that right after I finish this. The NC Modernist website is wonderful. It is right down here that they go over all of the usually post-war architects from North Carolina and the buildings that they built. And it's a wonderful rundown run by a nonprofit up in Raleigh. And they're just a great organization. But I used them, and then their information on Tommy Hayes. So if you want to learn more about Pines Preservation Guild and what we do, again, Laurel kind of talked about what our mission is, and that is historic preservation, heritage conservation here in Moore County. It's not just Southern Pines, it's all Moore County, but we are at pinespreservation.org, and then we are online on Facebook and Instagram at Pines Preservation Guild. And we would love to hear from anybody who wants to talk historic buildings with us. And that's kind of what we're here for. So I'm going to stop my share, because I'm going to show you, I don't know if I can finish it. Oops. You might have to do that. Laurel. I don't know if I can stop my screen. Nope. I'm trying to, I know.
See if I can end it.
Yeah, I don't know if I can. It says pause share, stop share, stop share. I was afraid if I hit that, then I would stop the recording. So I didn't want to do that. So this is the book I highly recommend anybody get who has any interest in architectural history or historic preservation. This is A Field Guide to American Houses by Virginia Savage McAllister. This is her second edition. It is pretty much what they give every historic preservation architectural history student in the United States, in any program in the United States. This is a gold mine. So it is, I highly recommend. I pretty much have, this is my second volume of this. I have an older volume that is like torn to shreds just because I use it so often. So highly recommend getting this if you're interested in this style. Virginia McAllister did an amazing job, and this is essentially the Bible of architectural historians and preservationists. So, but anywho, if anybody has any questions, please go ahead and let me know. I don't know if you any came through, Laurel, but.
Catherine gave us a thumbs up and a heart. So we, Catherine, thank you everybody for being here.
See if in the chat there's anything. Okay, yes, perspective on a resort community. Yeah, don't do what I did where I got mine on like eBay for $50. Don't do that. Go to the library or Moore County Historical Association. Both of those have that. Oh, and I meant to mention this. And so the other resources that I use, and I highly recommend anybody use, is the State Historic Preservation Office, which is out of Raleigh. They have something on, they have something called ArcGIS. And what that is it is a database of every single historic property that they know about in the state of North Carolina. So whether it is a National Register building, it is a observed historic building, it's a building that they had to have surveyed during a Section 106 review, anything like that, you can just go to the State Historic Preservation Office website and access this GIS, and it will not only tell you everything you need to know about the property, but it'll send you straight to the register nomination. It'll tell you if it's on the study list. It'll tell you anything you want to know about that property, and it is extremely, it's wonderful. Again, Moore County Historical Association is great for learning about any history you want to know about a property that you have. They are a wealth of knowledge. If you're trying to find a photo of your property, go to them. They know what's up when it comes to the history of properties and the people who lived in them. And then once it opens back up, I do not believe it is open yet, but once it opens back up, is the Moore County Deed Office, is tons of information there too. So those are the big thing. Deed research, I mean, we learned of a whole course in college on that. So, definitely we have the resources here. Reach out to the organizations that are doing the work. And then, we're here to help. So what we're here for.
Well, thank you so much, Leslie. You did a great job. And
thank you.
My walks around town are going to be a lot better now that I can identify a lunette window and all the cool features.
Good.
So yeah, I guess that about wraps it up. So thank you so much everyone for attending, and yeah, please feel free to reach out to me or Leslie if you have any more questions or want more information. I'm sure Leslie would be happy to help get you started on your research, and yeah, so thanks so much.
Yep, absolutely. Thanks everyone.